Would your HR department's artificial intelligence platform allow you to hire the next Steve Jobs or Bill Gates? I'm Tanya Hall for ZDNet and Tech Republic, and joining me is John Sumser. He is the principal analyst at HR Examiner. Welcome, John.
Hey, how are you, Tanya? Nice to be here.
Well, so what is HR Examiner?
HR Examiner is a weekly newsletter about the edges of HR and HR technology.
And you have recently released a paper. Can you talk about that?
Sure. We've been doing a comprehensive look at the state of intelligence software, what some people call artificial intelligence, in HR and HR technology. And what you've seen is the most current study, and we're right in the middle of putting together the second annual edition, which will ship around Labor Day.
So what does artificial intelligence look like in HR today, and what are its applications?
So I don't want to get too far down in the argument, but I'd say that there is no artificial intelligence in HR today. There's a good deal of really interesting machine learning and natural language processing, but there's nothing that makes decisions for people, and there's nothing that replaces people. Mostly what we have in HR today is a lot of very fancy regression analysis and text analysis. It's used primarily in the recruiting sector, but its use around the rest of HR technology is increasing every day.
So what technologies are available now, and what can we expect in the near future to get us to that point where there's actual decision making?
It's a big, complex world, and things range from, in recruiting, you can have simple decision tree-based chatbots that solve screening and scheduling problems. Up in the larger HR technology space, there are Workday's planning tools and ultimate softwares, engagement and employee input systems that allow an organization to take better control over the relationship it has with its people.
So what kind of return on investment can companies expect with any sort of software that exists or any sort of machine learning right now?
I'd tell you that if you go after it looking for a return on investment, you're going to be disappointed. What there is to gain from getting on the artificial intelligence bandwagon at this point in the process is competitive advantage. But there's nobody who can tell you whether or not this stuff will eliminate jobs or save money or make things happen faster. What you can know is that the tools that are available make things happen better. And better means higher quality decision making, faster work sometimes, but we don't know much about how this works over the long haul. So ROI is the wrong way to think about it.
So you mentioned that this technology is being, and has been, I know for years, being used in the recruitment process. So how receptive are applicants and candidates and employees to artificial intelligence, like sometimes even chatbots?
Well, so anything that makes the painful process of looking for a job a little bit easier and a little bit friendlier is something that everybody likes. And that's the primary use right now, is getting better quality decisions as you thin down the people that you want to think about hiring, or making the candidate experience a little bit more engaging and transparent. Those are primary use cases for the tools, and people don't even really think about it as artificial intelligence. That's not how you encounter it. You just encounter it as better.
What are the ethical considerations of reliance on technology and HR? I mean, how do we prevent bias, and what should we audit or measure to ensure that it doesn't happen?
Big question, big answer. So let's start with bias and work our way to the rest of the stuff. Bias in HR is often code for discrimination against protected classes. And there are all sorts of things that are illegal. It's illegal to discriminate against protected classes. And as we've learned in the last year with Me Too, there are all sorts of things that should be protected but aren't illegal just yet. And so there's some work that could be done to mitigate bias in those areas, but there isn't really a way to eliminate it because bias isn't a function of technology, it's a function of people. One of my colleagues, a woman named Heather Bussing, who you might talk to one day, thinks that in terms of sexual harassment, it should be treated as a workplace safety issue, and that you can use AI to monitor attrition rates and disciplinary actions and internal transfers to be able to see where there are hot spots that might be sexual harassment zones. And so there's a way to move into making the workplace harassment free using this technology that's really interesting. In recruiting, the issues are what intelligence software wants to do is make a set of rules. It wants to take chaos and turn it into a set of rules. That's really what machine learning does. And the problem is, if you do that without thinking, you end up with very rigid qualifications for jobs. And very rigid qualifications for jobs prevent bias, but they only let you increase the mix of people in the workplace at the rate that universities can produce people who have those qualifications. What you'd rather do is have a system that looks at who might be successful in the job in spite of the fact that they don't have the qualifications and give people opportunities. In my own career, I was a philosophy major who became an engineer, and I became an engineer because somebody hired me based on what they thought, not what my qualifications were. And that's how you're going to increase diversity in organizations, is by giving people chances. And you can't give people chances if there's a rigid requirement set out there. So the ethical risk is that the desire to use a system that enforces qualifications as a way of making sure that there's no bias perpetuates the status quo and doesn't accelerate the enfranchisement of women, ethnic minorities, and gender preference related issues.
So to your point, some of the best employees I've had zero experience. I hired a woman once who had zero job experience, had been a stay-at-home mother, and I hired her much to the dismay of my manager and other leadership. She ended up being one of the best employees I had, very consistent and a high performer. So how does machine learning and artificial intelligence support that? I mean, should we still have human recruitment, or should we replace that and just trust our machine learning?
I think the biggest skill that people are going to need to develop is the capacity to argue with a machine. Right? That's if you imagine that intelligent machines are 4-year-old children, and they're really good at doing repetitive things. They're just not very good at understanding nuance. You manage them like they're 4-year-old children, and so there's lots of repetitive work that you could give them. You just can't trust them to make decisions, and you can't trust them to make the right decisions because machines don't have a conscience. Machines don't have empathy, and they don't have the ability to see things that aren't measured. Everything that people do involves seeing things that aren't measured, and you want to have that in the mix with perhaps a stream of unbiased information being presented for that kind of decision. You're always going to run into the fact that the nature of being human is to be biased. And you're going to run into the fact that human beings have a variety of kinds of biases. I can see things about the way that you do this show that somebody who hasn't done 500 podcasts couldn't see. And so that's a bias. I don't know if you want to correct for it or not. If you want to have a crummy show, you might want to correct for it, but you might not want to correct for it. And so we've got a lot to explore, I think, is what I'd say in short.
So how do you know when the machine has learned enough that its AI-based outputs are reliable?
I don't think you can know that. I think that what you have to do is treat the machine like an apprentice. and watch its work and help it learn. And as you learn to trust it, you learn to trust it. But you know, the best machine is going to be 90% accurate right now, and 90% accurate isn't really very good. You'll find people in the AI industry who say that's as good as a human being, but they're measuring different things. A machine can understand everything that can be turned into data. There's an entire universe of things that haven't been turned into data yet, and the machine will never have that level of nuance in its understanding. And we're talking about whether or not your mom gets a promotion here, or whether or not your mom gets on the layoff list, or whether or not your mom gets a good evaluation on her job. And those are things that you really don't want to trust to something that doesn't come with the capacity to make mistakes based on compassion.
So it sounds like this is going to be a huge challenge. I mean, some people, some of the, in fact, some of the most inventive and creative people think so far out of the box. I mean, how do you write an algorithm to recognize that talent when many of the conventional patterns don't apply?
Well, I think that's exactly the right question. I can tell you that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs would not have been qualified for their jobs, right? No, they're not qualified for the job. And so if you have a machine deciding who's going to be in and who's going to be out, it's going to miss that. Now, there are people who have jobs who think, man, the last thing that we want is Steve Jobs or Bill Gates to come work here. And um, uh, in those cases, that's a business's choice. It seems a little off the map to me, but if you run a gigantic call center, you're probably not looking for Steve Jobs to come in and reinvent something there. And so there's all sorts of use cases, and in the different use cases, the technology is better and worse.
Well, I really do appreciate your time, John, giving us some insight into machine learning and artificial intelligence in the world of HR. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to find out more about your work or your recently released paper, how can they do that?
Well, the very best thing to do is take a look at HR Examiner at hrexaminer.com. You can also reach me directly at john at hrexaminer.com. That's HREXAMINER.com. And I'm all over social media. It's not hard to find me.
Thanks again. And if you want to find more of my interviews, you can do that right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or maybe find me on social media by going to my website. It's tanyahall.net. Thanks for watching.